Good morning. Thank you all for coming to our panel this morning on nuclear dominoes in Northeast Asia. To begin, I wanted to start with some framing questions for the group and our speakers to consider as we move forward. Clearly, with North Korea's recent additional step towards joining the Nuclear Weapons Club, we see this growing concern in the region about which states in Northeast Asia could potentially be next in trying to seek the nuclear weapons path. And so as we gather here this morning and as we engage our speakers in a very interactive dialogue after their initial remarks, I'd like to consider what are the likely tipping points for each of these core countries. And moving on to what the dominant perceptions and misperceptions are driving these key countries as they potentially consider nuclear weapons acquisition. And then finally, to consider some measures that we can undertake to prevent this from becoming a reality. Let me start with Dr. Joyshan Che from the Berkeley Nuclear Research Center. He is the Associate Director. Previously, he was a visiting professor at the Tokyo Institute of Technology and also a project professor for the Global Center of Excellence program at the University of Tokyo. And prior to that, he worked at Lord's Livermore National Laboratory for 21 years. So let me begin with Dr. Che. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman. And good morning. Actually, my last name should be pronounced as Choi.
Choi.
Because,
My apologies.
you know, I'm one of the lucky guys that I'm a Chinese American with a very popular Korean name. So I always welcome here in Seoul. First, I would like to thank Asan Foundation for the invitation to this very timely and important forum and to participate in this very intricate panel. And before I begin, I would like to state that the viewpoint made here are those of my own and may or may not be of those that of my previous or current affiliations. So if the purpose for this panel is to seek an answer for this question, whether after the North Korean nuclear test on last Tuesday, will there be a nuclear domino taking place in Northeast Asia? In my view, the answer is a simple and resounding no. Because in Northeast Asia, we're looking into Japan and South Korea. They are under the U.S. nuclear umbrella. Regardless what the North Korean would do, it will not trigger a domino. If North Korea actually could be the first piece of a domino, it would have happened in 2006 and 2009, but it won't. So my remarks should end here, but I won't. Instead, I would like to take this opportunity to deliberate this particular issue further. But before I do that, I'd like to change the title slightly of this panel. The title I suggest is a pseudo domino, nuclear domino in Northeast Asia. To do that, once I change it, a pseudo domino is not a real thing, but it could be the one very close to the real thing. So to do that, then I could be as provocative as possible to suggest a pseudo domino. The first piece to fall would be Japan. And in my opinion, it's only Japan that have the stature to be that first piece of domino. The panelists from South Korea may not agree with me, but I would, explain it later. So if Japan go first, South Korea will follow. Then next is Taiwan. When that happens, the domino will shift to Southeast Asia, starting with Vietnam, and given time, Philippines, and so on. So this pseudo-nuclear domino not only is bad for East Asia, lousy for international stability, and certainly devastating to the non-proliferation regime. The reason for that is Japan, among all the non-nuclear weapons countries, has been entrusted with a full scope of fuel cycle capability, including enrichment and reprocessing. For Japan to go nuclear, basically we can see the non-proliferation regime go down. The NPT is going to become useless. When that happens, I would believe that everybody is going to go just like the U.S. gun problem, then everybody going to go out for themselves. You like to have one, regardless either it's a handgun or a assault rifle, doesn't matter, because the goal is to get one for self-defense. So given the severity of this problem, we can analyze that condition. What could make Japan to go nuclear, to be that first piece of domino? As I said it before, the nuclear test by North Korea will not do it. I will even argue the current dispute, territorial dispute with China in East China Sea may not do it. But if that dispute could result in some kind of a conflict, regardless the extent or the outcome, the action taken or not taken by the United States will be very closely analyzed. And I believe that in the result of that analysis may contain an option which could make or could argue Japan could go nuclear. The reason is Japan, currently under the U.S. umbrella, clearly has no incentive to go nuclear on its own. But if one realizes that the insurance company does not deliver satisfactorily at a time of need, or the premium goes up after the event, which usually is the case, one will honestly and definitely will review that policy. Maybe go for other insurance, or in this case, trying to develop your own umbrella. And I believe that South Korea and Taiwan are watching this situation very closely. So this is clearly not a desirable situation. So from the chairman, we have what would be the measure? Could there be any measure with preventing from it happening? I would like to offer two. The first one is all the parties involved has to be sensibly and seriously taking the efforts to defuse the dispute. And the party I'm talking about is not only just China and Japan, but the United States as well. And perhaps the U.S. is the only effective mediator in this particular situation. And this effort has to be successful and maybe continuing. The reason is this is not going to be the first or the only dispute. There are going to be future conflict in the horizon. For instance, when Japan is not going nuclear, Japan will be in a direct competition, fierce competition with China and others for fossil fuel. And in future time, when climate change has made the Arctic Ocean to be a free passage for transportation, fighting for conflict resulted because of wanted to have the access to that Arctic passageway and the energy resources, together with some of the territorial dispute with Russia. All these are part of the future problem, that horizon. So Japan may learn, living among major power is going to be not so easy, and it's becoming more difficult. The second measure that I would like to suggest, maybe this is a bit easier to do, is to suggest in East Asia to form a regional cooperative framework, including all the existing civilian nuclear program in China, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and newcomer country in Vietnam, Malaysia, North Korea. Why not? North Korea is building its own PWR. Given the fact that 20 years ago, concepts such as ASEAN Atom, Pacific Atom, regional compact has been suggested before. None of them have any traction. But there is a sense of urgency to do it now, in the context of 3S, which is safety, security, and safeguard nonproliferation. Because we need to seriously deal with this problem of latency in nonproliferation once and for all. Time is of essence, and as there is a sense of urgency to find a solution for the dispute in East China Sea. 2013 is the year of the snake. Game-changing event have a tendency happen in the year of the snake. Pearl Harbor in 1941, Tiananmen in 1989, 9/11 in 2001, all happened in a snake year. I believe any conflict between Japan and China will rise up to that status as a game-changing event. And that's for 2013. After that, 2014 is a 120-year anniversary of the first Sino-Japanese War in 1894, which is the direct cause of the current dispute between the two countries. 120 is 2 times 60. 60 is a very, very important, number in Oriental calendar. So before I wander into any more provocative prediction, I better stop here.
Very scary predictions, but thank you
No,
for
it's
framing
not scary at all.
Thank you for framing it in the very multidisciplinary approaches there. If I can move on now to Professor Kim Young-ho from the Korea National Defense University. He is currently also the director of the Center for Security Policy Studies at the Research Institute for National Security Affairs at the Korea National Defense University. If I could ask you, as Dr. Choi did, keep your remarks to about 8 minutes, that would be great.
Sure, okay.
Thank you, Professor Kim.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's quite an honor to be here with this kind of distinguished panelist. Actually, basically, I almost agree with what Professor Choi said, except the motivation of the Japan going nuclear, but or the occasion making Japan going nuclear. But basically, I agree with it. I mean, Japan will be the first one. But let me start with the kind of why I'm thinking of that. When we talk about the possible candidates for the nuclear dominoes in Northeast Asia, as he says, it's Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, only 3 countries, basically, we are talking about. And also, when it consider the possibility of this nuclear proliferation, chain reaction of the nuclear proliferation, I think we must consider 4 factors. First one, technical feasibility. Second, economic legal constraint. And third, it's economic robustness. Fourth, it's alliance dynamic. So the first, technical feasibility, I think it also includes 3 sub-factors. The fissile fuel availability. Second, it's manpower. And third, the manufacturing technology. So considering all these factors, only Japan is very close to have it, right? They have nuclear fissile fuels right now. Some studies says 30 tons. Some studies says 40 tons, which almost make about 1,000 nuclear bombs. So they are very close because they have it, the materials. As far as technology and manpower goes, Taiwan and South Korea also have it, I think. Close to. They need some more kind of time, more time than Japan. But still, it's the technology and manpower, maybe it's okay. But the fuel, I mean, that's not available enough. Enough fuel, they don't have it. China, Taiwan and Korea. And then legal constraint, all 3 has legal constraint, I think. Internationally, all 3 actually committed to the NPT regime, right? Because Taiwan is not considered as a state officially. They are not member of the NPT right now, but they used to be. And currently, I think they have special arrangement with IAEA and United States, kind of trilateral special arrangement for safeguarding the proliferation. So all 3 has legal constraint. And domestically, Japan has their own laws, actually, that prevent them from developing it. And South Korea, we have a joint declaration with North Korea for the denuclearization. So that kind of legal constraint, actually, all 3 have, right? So it prevents them from developing it. And third factor, economic robustness. As we know, I mean, all 3 have enough money to finance developing the nuclear weapons. But I think when I said economic robustness, it means actually kind of a resistance. How can they can endure international sanction? Once they start to develop it, I think that's obviously international sanction put over them, right? So whether they can resist it or not, they their economy is robust enough to, to overcome those kind of sanctions. I don't think so, because as we know, all three has a market-oriented and a trade-dependent economy. So I don't think they can sustain that kind of economic sanctions put by the international community. And so the last factor, alliance dynamics, that's, I think, the main factor, actually, which decide. It's kind of related to his point, too. But basically, all three countries, as we know, they are kind of allies. Japan and South Korea is legally, we are allies to the United States. And also, so all three has actually kind of a nuclear umbrella provided by the United States. And so that basically, that kind of umbrella kind of help all three countries or all three states not developing it, right? But in the long term, situation can be a little bit different. Professor Choi says maybe Japan and China kind of territorial dispute maybe kind of in the long run trigger that kind of chain reaction. But I think I'm not wanting to be that specific, but China will be the factor. And China continues to rise, and this kind of economy make United States kind of doing it alone, make it difficult, make United States difficult to do it alone. So maybe United States wanted to share some kind of burdens of defense in this area. Maybe they ask Japan, not ask, maybe they just ignore, they just allow Japan to go nuclear. That will be the fact in the long term. But in the short term, I don't think that's going to happen soon. So basically, so that's what, and also why Japan the first? I think that United States still consider Japan as their first and foremost important ally in this region, other than actually Philippines or South Korea. So if they want to do it, they will allow Japan go first. So that's why I think I agree with basically I agree with Professor Choi said. So in conclusion, I think it's not going to happen in the near future. I mean, that's nuclear proliferation not going to happen in this region in the near future. But in the long run, maybe 15 or 20 years later, I mean, that's that whole kind of alliance dynamics or kind of a power configuration or strategic configuration changes. It can happen. So that's my conclusion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Professor Kim. Our next speaker is Mr. Li Hong, who is the current Secretary General of the China Arms Control and Disarmament Association. Previously, he was a Deputy Representative of China to the OPCW in The Hague, and also the Permanent Mission of China for International Organizations in Vienna and at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China. Please, Mr. Li.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the Asan Institute for providing me this opportunity to speak here. Nuclear non-proliferation is a global issue, especially to the region where the security situation is more complex. In the area like our region, Northeast Asia. In the region, in the past years, the political, economical, scientific, even cultural competition have promoted the area into a prosperity and also very quick development. But on the other side, nuclear proliferation has always bothering us during the past decades. North Korea's consecutive third nuclear test has brought us to another trigger point. If it is not handled properly, there is a high risk of a nuclear domino in our region. I think there are three major reasons for the risk of nuclear domino in the region. First of all, of course, it is the nuclear DPRK and its increasing nuclear capability. North Korea's determination to have nuclear weapons has been demonstrated by the third nuclear test, by the three nuclear tests. And there's no clear evidence that they are ready to negotiate to give it up, I'm quite pessimistic about it. The security situation is getting more complicated in the peninsula, as well as to the region. Responses from South Korea and Japan is expectable, although they have many options. But we have already heard a lot over the media, even from some politicians' mouth, talking about nuclear option. So this should not be ignored. According to the press release issued last night, the poll on South Korea people says that over 66% of South Korea is in favor of possessing their own nuclear weapons program. So this is quite worrisome. And in Japan, I think we also heard such voices, especially from the very senior politicians. So this is more risky. So this is the first reason. So DPRK's capability or nuclear weapons program have been the catalyzer for the nuclear domino in the region. Second, lack of the security arrangements in the region is one of the very serious cause for the nuclear domino in the region. The Northeast Asia is the only region that maintains the Cold War security arrangement. The peninsula is still on armistice agreement. There widely existed historic problem among the countries in Northeast Asia, and territorial disputes is also getting more serious these days. Pending issues like abduction of Japanese by North Korea, these issues are also very, very serious. The rapid rising of China has been changing the balance of the region in some people's view. Others, or Chinese, believe the U.S. rebalance strategy also caused tension in the region. And the U.S. going to have in this nuclear disarmament, the reduction of nuclear arsenals also caused some skepticism from South Korea and Japan for the U.S. Credibility on the extended deterrence. So the security situation is getting more and more complex in the area. DPRK, of course, we put it as an exceptional. But as for South Korea and Japan, if any of them decided, Mr. Choi says if Japan, I would say if any of South Korea or Japan decided to go nuclear, I think the other country will follow suit. So this is the second reason for the risk of domino. The third, nuclear capability in the region has already brought the region very close to the nuclear domino. As the previous speakers have mentioned, both Japan and South Korea are very prominent countries which have very advanced nuclear technology. Japan has complete fuel cycle capability. It also has large number of plutonium reserve. If they decided to go to nuclear, no people believe they need long time to reach the goal. South Korea also has been trying to break through the U.S. constraint on the fuel cycle. Also, some South Korea scientists had conducted laser enrichment experiment in the past. This demonstrated that South Korea there's no technical obstacle for South Korea scientists to go nuclear. So with this technological capability, I think for the region to have domino, it's real and very imminent. Fortunately, the fragile balance has not been broken in the past decades, and the domino does not happen so far. Thanks first should go to the international non-proliferation regime. I think the non-proliferation regime has been playing a very important role, not only to the region, of course, but also to the global. Non-proliferation outlawed the nuclear weapons. Such legal commitment to good guys, they are real constraint. Perhaps they are not to the bad guys like DPRK. They're not effective enough. U.S. security nuclear umbrella, security guidance and nuclear umbrella also played some positive role in preventing or constraining South Korea and Japan to go to nuclear. Of course, Japan has also peace constitute to restrain itself. But the nuclear umbrella, on the other side, could be considered as one of the stimulators for DPRK to go to nuclear. So nuclear umbrella's role is double-sided. It is lucky that the domino has not been happened so far in the region or to the world. But the demon is always there. Nuclear domino in Northeast Asia, if happened, it will not only limited to our region. It will have global impact. It will overflow to other regions very quickly. So preventing the domino to be falling down is a very emergent task for all of us. My prescription go to following aspects. First, at this moment, we should have a very quick, very determined, proper solution to the DPRK nuclear issue. To let all the countries in the region to believe that the outlawed guy would be punished and they need to pay high price. So this is, I think, what the international community is doing. The Security Council is discussing about new sanctions against DPRK. I'm sure China will be one of the active players in this field. Second, I think to our region, we need comprehensive measures to strengthen the non-proliferation regime. And also we need security arrangements. More broad security arrangements is very imminent issue for our region. We need a peace agreement to the region, to the peninsula. We also need some mechanisms to discuss about our security concern. In this field, I think the current existed or the stalemate six-party talks still can play some role. We should not give up. Third, I agree with the previous speakers. Both China and US have special responsibility to prevent the domino in the region. As two UN Security Council permanent members, also two nuclear weapon states on the NPT, recognized on the NPT, they should cooperate more on security arrangements in the region. Last but not least, civil society could play a very important role in preventing the countries to go to nuclear. I think if the people does not support, they will establish very restraint for the hawkish or conservatives to go to advocate for nuclear. And in this field, I think we should keep high alerting on the voices of advocating for nuclear weapons. Such voice really deteriorates the environment for dialogue and for trust. So I stop here.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. Our next speaker is Mr. Miles Pomper, who is currently the Senior Research Associate at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies. He previously was the Editor-in-Chief of Arms Control Today, and also lead foreign policy reporter for CQ Weekly and Legislate News Service. Miles was also formerly a Foreign Service Officer with the U.S. Information Agency. Miles.
Thanks, John, and thanks to Asan for having me. It's a little hard to be the last speaker in a panel with which you generally agree on everything everyone said before. So what I'm going to try to do is talk a little bit less about some of the factors, particularly the kind of signs of concern that we see in these countries and the signs of assurance that one could have about the chances that these countries won't sort of fall in nuclear dominoes. Maybe talk a little bit more about the U.S. role, about the is there a rationale for Japan or Korea to go nuclear? Does it make strategic sense? And then have a few concluding thoughts. So first of all, I think the previous speakers have done a good job of talking about what the signs of concern are. We've got certain talk from politicians in countries like Korea and Japan about maybe we should have nuclear weapons. We heard some of that yesterday. We've had developments in the nuclear industry and fuel cycle developments which provide the basis, certainly in Japan already, with their stocks of plutonium. Korea talking about doing pyroprocessing, which would give Korea the same capability. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is that the space programs in both countries. We just saw a few weeks ago South Korea launching its first space vehicle. And we can criticize the North Koreans for conducting space tests, but the space, technology works the same in both countries. You have the technology to do space launches, you have the technology to launch missiles. So that happens there. Japan has also had space programs, and we've also had a recent agreement in South Korea to extend the missile range permitted for cruise missiles and so on. So we've got the capabilities that are growing in place in both countries to have nuclear weapons and deliverable nuclear weapons if they wanted them. The positive thing is that both countries are deeply invested in the nuclear nonproliferation regime, been generally good nonproliferation actors. Japan's been an exemplary one, I would say. We've got, both countries are also very tied to the global economy and the economic cost to them. Someone mentioned the kind of sanctions and political pressures that might happen if they were to become nuclear weapon states, certainly without the blessing of the United States, could be quite high. So does it make sense, leaving all that aside, if you're a strategic planner here in Korea or in Japan, I'm sort of not talking about Taiwan because I agree with the assessment by Jorshan that Taiwan would be the last one to fall, given its special relationship with the United States and the kind of protection it relies on there. I would say in Japan, the difference is that Japan right now has kind of an equal need for balancing both North Korean and Chinese nuclear capabilities. The North Korean capabilities can be pretty well constrained by the U.S. Nuclear umbrella, by missile defenses, and so on. And if there's a clear attack on the Japanese homeland, then the security treaty evidently kicks in, and all the other the escalation dominance that the U.S. and Japan enjoy in that situation also kicks in and becomes a deterrent. And right now, we don't have the traditional extended deterrence dilemma, which is, as Charles de Gaulle said during the Cold War, would you trade New York for Paris? Would we trade Honolulu for Japan? Well, North Korea doesn't have the range to hit Honolulu, doesn't have the range to hit the United States yet. But when we're talking about China and Japan, as we talk about the Senkakus and these kind of disputes, first of all, the U.S. position is frankly not all that coherent or clear because you've got a distinction between, does the U.S. think this is really a Japanese possession or Chinese one? It's kind of, there's no real clear position on that. On the other hand, we say the security treaty will kick in. So that leaves a lot of room for ambiguity, ambivalence, which might lead to testing in that situation. And of course, China already has deliverable nuclear weapons that can hit the United States, so you've got this question of extended deterrence kicking in. Will the U.S. really be willing to risk, the west coast of the United States for these small islands in the Pacific with no one on them? When it comes to Korea, the relationship is not as tense with China. It's more or less of a threat to South Korea, and the real focus is North Korea. Even a nuclear-armed North Korea, I don't think is likely to go. I mean, this question that Bob Gallucci posed, is this for offensive capabilities or for defense? But my assessment is it's primarily defensive, and there's not likely to defensive, and I would say internal politics. I mean, I think it has more to do that with in a lot of ways than anything else. But they're not likely to use this to launch a full-scale invasion of South Korea. So what would it more likely be do is that we'd have more incidents like we had a couple of years ago, the Cheonan sinking, Yongbyon Island, and so on, and maybe some kind of external blackmail. So, is this going to change? Should this change South Korea's risk calculus and what it needs? Well, I don't think nuclear weapons would help South Korea, whether they're U.S. nuclear weapons or South Korean nuclear weapons. North Korea has managed to deter a South Korean response so far, even without having the capabilities to deliver the weapons. The real thing is we've got a whole bunch of artillery tubes aimed at Seoul, and Seoul is much less willing to risk damage than North Korea is. It's an asymmetric view of what the risk is. So this wouldn't change whether maybe it would make people in South Korea feel better and politicians feel better to have the weapons, but it's not going to change the deterrence calculus there. So what is the U.S. challenges in this situation? How does the U.S. deal with it? Well, there's various tools the U.S. can use. There's rhetorical assurances. I mean, it was notable that there was a clear press statement right after the North Korean test that the President Obama had called the Prime Minister of Japan to reaffirm the U.S. defense commitments to Japan, including the nuclear umbrella. I don't think that was an accident. I mean, I think their analysis is pretty much what we've heard on this panel, that Japan is the first potential dominant. There's missile defense. There's greater extended defense coordination, which we've had with South Korea. There's increased conventional deployments. So the U.S. is leaning on the pillars of its alliance with Japan and South Korea, but I would say one thing that would be helpful to resolve are the tensions between Japan and South Korea to the extent we can. These kind of small disputes over islands we've had, of course, all the historic issues. The more that three countries can come together, the more coherent they can be in dealing with either North Korea or China. And the U.S., of course, has a good trade relationship with China, doesn't want to make this an issue too. It has to balance between its relationships with Japan and Korea and with China. One problem that is difficult here is there's not a good language between the U.S. and China, particularly in terms of the conceptual language. I mean, the way deterrence is treated in the Chinese language, and I'm sure you could help me with this, it's a wording problem. From the people I know who've talked about this, it means different things when you translate these words into Chinese than it does in English and so on. So even the language you're using to communicate can be difficult. So just the more dialogue and communication that the countries can have and have a common understanding is very helpful. And the U.S. has really been doing what's kind of a reactive policy. There really hasn't been internal clarity in the U.S. about, what do we do if there's an attack on these islands in the Pacific? How do we react? What are our red lines? What are our scenarios? Let alone communicating them to our allies and to potential adversaries. So what are the regional security ingredients that we have to think about? I would say that for Japan or South Korea, nuclear weapons offer a little security benefit. Neither country has significant geographical depth for a second strike. High population densities and asymmetric incentives limit the feasibility of nuclear options in both countries. Would Korea, for instance, be really willing to trade and have a nuclear exchange with North Korea, or would Japan be willing to do it with China? It's a no-win proposition for those countries. And I would say that even the pursuit of the weapons by those countries would bring a serious response by China. So is that even this talk and even this response, I think it's counterproductive. Optimally, as my colleagues have said, really the U.S. and China particularly have to try to create security in the region. There has to be some sort of a baseline agreement by the two big guys in the region about how security will function. And these include diplomatic solutions to territorial issues, whether it's in these particular islands and so on, and also, of course, the kind of things that Bob Gallucci was talking about with North Korea. In their absence, both Korea and Japan are probably going to have to be willing to run higher conventional risks, higher responses to incidents like we had in 2010. And the U.S. is going to have to allow those. Thomas Schelling said, you don't have to be willing to exchange New York for Paris. You have to be willing to have a scenario that's plausible in an accident scenario that could lead to that. And that's what we've been unwilling to do. We've been so restrained in our response, the accident scenario hasn't developed. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Miles. Before going to the audience for some Q&A, I'd like to start things off. I'll try to sprinkle some questions for the speakers, but if I could start with Mr. Lee. It seems right now North Korea technically isn't the first domino yet. It has made strides towards attaining full nuclear weaponization with the activities on the long-range missile tests, increasing payload, as well as trying to miniaturize a warhead. But it seems that as North Korea makes progress towards this particular goal, the Chinese approach to dealing with North Korea, I think, can be summarized as a contradiction with an unintended consequence. China seems to be very unique in having two tracks in dealing with North Korea. One is the very high-level party-to-party connection, and that seems to be a prioritization of stability, where China has, in many respects, its own version of a sunshine policy, but with very distinct Chinese characteristics, and again, with the primary focus on stability. And the second track, we have China as the chair of the six-party talks, ongoing efforts to try to get the six-party talks going again, and something that has been enormously frustrating for China. But the unintended consequence seems to be that as China prioritizes stability through the party-to-party, and specifically in international liaison connections, from North Korea's perspective, the incentive or even the pressure to go back to the six-party talks are alleviated. Can you talk a little more about that quandary for China, as it seems to be one key aspect that seems to deflate other efforts from other countries?
This is a question which have been raised in many occasions. It's really hard to explain. But on the other side, I would like to say the Chinese decide its position over the DPRK nuclear issue on its own interests. This interest first is the Chinese security consideration, security environment build up. We need security for our own economic development and social development. So security, we don't expect to have in a deteriorated Korea Peninsula. So from this sense, I think we insist on to have stability in the region, in the peninsula, emphasize the importance of stability. But on the other side, non-proliferation regime is also one of the very important national interests for China. Just like what we said, nuclear domino in the region will clearly first hit the Chinese security environment, deteriorate the situation there. So it is also closely related to the stability, as non-proliferation is also closely related to our national interests. So under this sense, on these circumstances, we also emphasize respect the sovereignty of the other country. We are trying to understand what the North Korea is concerning, what they are pursuing. And we are not making decisions for them. We don't have the full control of another country or another party. We quite trying to be a constructive partner to making suggestions for them. It depends on them for making their choice. So I don't think there's a very strict conflict among the Chinese policy. It is consistent. Chinese policy is always consistent. And first, we think stability is the premises for solving nuclear issue. Otherwise, we can only go military. Military is not an option. It has been proved it cannot work in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in other Middle East countries. So we emphasize stability is not just for stability. On this stability, we can find solutions for non-proliferation arrangements. And six-party talks is one of the ways China is exploring for how to play a more constructive role to solving such regional issue. So this is what I understand of this issue.
Thank you. I have some follow-up questions, but perhaps I can ask those later. But go ahead.
Let me jump in.
Mr.
I mean, because I agree with John says. I mean, and his concern, because I have the same concern. I mean, when you talk about China, I forgot actually mentioning the short-term possibility for this kind of the nuclear dominoes triggered in this region when I said first time. Because the longer term, I mean, the strategic configuration can make that happen. But the short term, Japan and Korea jointly declare we're going to start nuclear program together. That's one possibility. The region is, I think, basically China or North Korea, but our kind of frustration because of the North Korean continuous development and also the Chinese kind of a reaction. Seems like Chinese government knows how to deal with North Korea. You keep saying that. Chinese government keeps saying that, right? Don't worry. The way we're pursuing is the right way to do it. But it's not happening. I mean, it's not that effective. Sorry. So it's really frustrating. So maybe because you don't feel that the urgency strong enough to actually kind of doing some kind of a pressure on the North Korea. So my kind of it's more tactical thing. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen. Japan and Korea are going together. But maybe that kind of move can give some kind of feeling of urgency for China to act on more kind of viciously. Don't you think so?
If you could quickly respond, Mr. Lee, and then we'll go to the audience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, I think China always feel urgent to handle this DPRK nuclear issue. That's why we have been so active in promoting six-party talks. But the DPRK nuclear issue is a long-historic issue, have very complicated historic, geopolitical reasons. So no country, not only China, even the number one, the United States, can't have a solution to the issue. How can you expect China to solve this issue? So you cannot put so much burden on China, this first point. On the second point, China is doing more and more to address this issue, to play a more visible, active role in this issue. We have done a lot. But on the other side, as we emphasized, as for the Koreans, both of the South and North are Koreans. In Chinese view, we won't not expect our brothers or cousins to go to these humanitarian disasters. This is one of the considerations. We Chinese, we don't expect, we don't want to see our neighbors to go to these humanitarian disasters. We want to prevent such scenario. So this is also one of the restraints for China. And as for what you mentioned about South Korea and Japan's voice, or some people say, you need to go to nuclear to counter North Korea nuclear threats. I think this is not in the interest, not good for solving the DPRK nuclear issue. And this is against the international law. I don't think Japan and South Korea will follow the suit like an isolated guy like North Korea. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. If I could move to the audience, any questions? Start with, yes. Right there.
by implication, there's also, in addition to those variables that you mentioned, manpower, legal constraints and fuel and so on, I guess there's also an implicit recognition of the importance of other variables like political pressure from the US and maybe even rational argument. But there was one variable conspicuously missing, and that was the psychological one, the one about community sentiment and just how much resistance or the contrary there would be in the respective societies. And I'd like both Dr. Kim and Dr. Choi to comment on that variable in Japan and Korea at the moment. How important is Abe's accession with all, I mean, he's being a moderate now, at least until the July upper house election, but there's an instinctive hardline conservative position there and a lot of enthusiasm for changing the constitution on self-defence and so on. How much of that has the potential to soften up what has until now been a phenomenally strong community resistance to any thought of Japan going down that path? And more particularly in South Korea. I mean, with this enthusiasm that's being articulated by Dr. Chung in particular for tacticals coming back into South Korea, being very enthusiastically documented by ASEAN, as we heard from Chabong last night, and quite a lot of talk increasingly emerging about going the further distance. Is that softening up whatever degree of psychological or community sentiment is out there against nukes? I mean, my instinct is that, unlike what Dr. Choi said, on this factor, ROK is potentially much more likely to go down that path than, in fact, Japan, notwithstanding your identification as Japan as the primary potential problem.
Thank you. Dr. Choi, would you like to start?
Yeah, no, I cannot speak for Japan. And as I say, in my scenario, I only outline a pseudo domino. And in that, in that sense, I can provocatively, describing it. What the psychology or the sentiments in Japanese public, especially after the earthquake and tsunami, historically, you know that there is in 1930 when the Kanto earthquake happened, that led into some kind of a psychology shift that resulted in, subsequently maybe, that Japanese advance into China, Korea and China. So, but it will not happen because we are different time. And also, I believe that Fukushima accident actually have effect. And also, the sentiments of the people, even though they don't know how to deal with the word nuclear, but nevertheless, they still have to balance, their own perspective from a historical aspect and facing into the future. But it's a complex matter, no doubt about it, it's a complex matter, even though, Prime Minister Abe is trying to, quote-unquote, make Japan a normal country. Well, see, the key thing is it's a normal country, so in honesty, what the background behind that is, of course, is Japan thought or have been considering them not so normal after the war. Or, I think that mainly because of the pressure from the U.S. has created some kind of disparity in there. So making Japan more normal is what people would say. What would that equate to shifting to the right? So we are not in the position to even judge on that yet, in my opinion. So specifically looking into the current issue, when in my pseudo domino scenario, I was specifically looking into one specific situation. Again, in the pseudo situation, is the dispute between Japan and China in that situation. It will not involve in any nuclear exchange in any shape or form. But the issue that I outline in here, in terms of that umbrella, even not a nuclear umbrella, is an insurance policy. So the alliance is providing some assurance that if anything, happen to Japan, the U.S. will be there with Japan. So that, what is exactly that particular word, will be there with you or may be covered by the alliance. That's where I think it's worthwhile what I call in my, in my opening remark as an analysis. I carefully put it, that analysis would result in cases that argue that Japan may go nuclear, such as you say, okay, you will come to my aid, but hesitantly, or the aid is not what I expected. All these are conditions need to be carefully, evaluated. And I'm using the form of insurance policy is that the premium will go up, yes. everything that you're trying to help me with a string attached, and up to the point that string attached is so severe that it will result in some kind of a in some economic penalty. All these are part of that analysis, which is very, very simplistic in my mind, just rub it through. But clearly, believe me, it will be very carefully analyzed in every action or non-action if that happens. And the reason why that's the case is because the dispute, if it end up to be a conflict, in my opinion, that would be the end, the game-changing event, much more so than anything that we could see. Because that the game-changing event will make the entire regime, the regional relationship, change. I mean, the way it is in my own mind, that very difficult to deal with even North Korea situation, because you don't have China and Japan on the same page, for example. It's not going anywhere. I mean, that besides the point. There are many other initiatives you're trying to get the regional idea going, including the one I suggested in here, a regional framework. Well, that strictly deal with the civilian aspect of it. To me, I think it certainly needs to be done, and has been proposed 20 years ago. It should be revisiting that. That means, like Euratom, why Euratom is still functioning even to this day from 1957, and nothing happened nothing of such framework is happening in East Asia. It's because that historical and everything has to be evaluated, and this is the time to look into that. This is the time to revisit that framework, because clearly, as I say, it's a very undesirable situation when we're seeing all the civilian nuclear program happening in East Asia and even in Southeast Asia. Again, from a technical standpoint, having the civilian program if we have a non-proliferation regime, and everybody sign up to that regime and maintain a peaceful program is one thing. But if spent fuel produced in those civilian programs are literally speaking located in all these locations, then all we're talking about is a matter of time. And that is what I'm seeing, the urgency that we need to start that framework, even for the civilian nuclear program.
Great. Professor Kim.
Okay, for Korea, I cannot speak for all Koreans, but my kind of evaluation is the possibility is still low. I mean, emotionally, yes, we actually kind of, because of this current North Koreans test, I mean, and also the frustration by the Chinese reaction, as I mentioned. I mean, that's emotionally, we all almost all Koreans feel like we won't have it. But up here, I mean, we know it's impossible. At least, I mean, in the near future. Only maybe less than 10% of our people, extremely conservatives, maybe, we have to do it. But still, I think it's economy first. I mean, as I said, we are already, it's capitalist and trade dependent. And so it's kind of difficult to imagine. And strategically, that means we will lose U.S. alliance, right? So, I mean, that's defending us against the North Korean, threat, it definitely is, still we need the alliance. So until unification occurs, I mean, that's, I don't think it's going to happen, even though strategically. And also even military, I think just making nuclear bomb, couple of nuclear bomb, is one thing. But it is another to deploying it and actually how to use it, right? So to do it, we had a more kind of sophisticated military. So it's taking a long time, I think, for our military. I mean, our military is good, but still, it's going to take a long time to actually, run that program. So as a weapon. So I don't think even military can say, I mean, we can do it. It's going to take a long time, even though we started right now. I mean, it's going to take more than 10 years, I think, technically. So up here, we know that it's going to not happen. So I don't think it's, emotionally, we can say that. But believe me, maybe 3 months later, it's cooled down. That's my kind of judge, my relation. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Kim. If I could take a question from the side here. Yes.
If you allow me, I'd like to ask a rather frank question to Mr. Miles Pomper and Lee Hong. The first round of proliferation, if we can call it that, with North Korea and the possibility of Iran going nuclear in the future, if that's the first round of proliferation, it's largely from countries which have been anti-US and aided or encouraged directly or indirectly by China in the process. The next round of proliferation that we're talking about with Japan and ROK would be allies of the US and who would complicate the security of China. So do we see here some kind of a making of a great game? I mean, you could say that the US holds non-proliferation very dear and therefore it's unlikely to happen, but we've seen non-proliferation being given the short shrift when national interest was involved. So do you see here an incipient possibility of a great game being played out with these countries?
Perhaps you want to start?
Well, I don't think that's the intention of the U.S. government. I mean, whether this would happen in 15, 20 years from now when security situation changes and obviously China continues to grow as a power, that one can't rule that out. But I mean, I don't think that's in the U.S. interest, and it's clearly not in China's interest. I mean, for economic reasons alone, we don't want this kind of tension in this region, and all these kind of game. I mean, it's kind of great game analogies may make people feel good as strategic thinkers, but I don't think it's in anyone's interest.
Mr. Lee?
I think as for the non-proliferation, for the objective or for the purpose of non-proliferation, China and the US have no substantive difference on this field. We share wide common interests in this field for the non-proliferation. Both China and the US oppose such proliferation, I'm sure. No people in our country even support North Korea or Iran to have this nuclear proliferation. But the addressing approach is different in many occasions. So China supports through negotiations, through dialogue, through diplomatic way. US prefer sometimes sanctions, but now China also drawing sanctions both on Iran and Iraq, on DPRK. So this is we have also a lot of cooperation in this field with US, including reducing some of the oil import from Iran. So China is cooperating on this issue.
Great. Another question from inside there. Yes.
Jungo Kim at the Exim Bank. Well, humbleness doesn't mean a weakness, but instead it's strength that is abstained. Well, I have a question for Dr. Kim. You said it takes for South Korea a lot of time to develop nuclear weapons. I wonder which side you are on, foreign ministry or defense ministry. If the South Korean government has the capacity to develop the weapons, but doesn't take the road, it is okay. But if the South Korean government has no power, no capacity to develop it, and it says, well, we have no interest in it, and we cannot do it, and no intention to do it, well, what does it mean? So Dominos imply Japan, South Korea, and what else? Countries in East Asia. Those two major countries will respond to North Korean nuclear ambition. So what South Korea's position? That's my question. Thank you.
I think you missed my presentation, right? I already said why it's impossible. I mean, I gave 4 reasons, 4 factors that can actually affect the 3 countries here, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, to whether they go nuclear or not.
Sorry, Taiwan is not a country. you have mentioned.
I'm sorry, yeah. Okay. But anyway, but because technically it's possible. That's it's not going to take a long time. If for Korea and Japan, Taiwan, we need fuel, that's the problem. But technical-wise, manpower, as I always said, it's possible. To mention it's going to take a long time, to having it, it's not going to take too much time, maybe, if we have fuel available. But as I mentioned, it's going to take a long time to deploy it and use it. The military point of view, it takes more than just having it. Let's say, I mean, that United States give us nuclear bomb today. Use it. We cannot do that. Because we need more knowledge and technology to use it. So that's why I'm saying we're going to take more time for our military to actually use it. Okay? So making it, I mean, it's not going to take a long time, and we have enough, that kind of scientific knowledge, I think. But intention, as I said, we want to have, it's just emotional thing. I think as far as even you would think as a Korean here, I mean, up here, as I said, it is almost, it's not that feasible enough. And policy, policy. I don't think it's any defense ministry or our foreign ministry wants to pursue that kind of, nuclear development. I don't think so. Maybe just tactically, as I said. I mean, it's kind of tactical reason dealing with North Korea. I mean, we can show some kind of, it's negotiation purpose. We can say maybe we can go nuclear, something like that. But I don't think really we're going to pursue it. That's not our policy at all, I think. Yes.
Dr. Choi, you had a very
Yes,
quick
I would like
two-finger.
to use the occasions to further, let's defining some of these terms so we don't get crossover in some confusion in here. Under the NPT, only 5 countries is designated as nuclear weapons country. Of course, there are nuclear capable country, weapons capable country, and subsequently that divided by that line. So, then once we get that, then we're still under the regime of NPT. The argument in my pseudo-domino scenario, since I always say that Japan is that, important first piece. Why? Because Japan is the brightest beacon of the non-proliferation regime. They were entrusted with all this fuel cycle capability. For Japan to go nuclear, one could assuming the NPT become useless. So under that situation is what I worry, what I was saying. The significance of that action is beyond with debating on North Korea or anybody else. And that is what the beginning of my pseudo-domino. So from that point on, and all this following is just like what I call the U.S. gun control problem. You don't go, there's no rationale behind, you just want to get a gun. Handgun or assault weapon is for the purpose of self-protection. But having said that, and this is why I say that it is utmost important, to make sure that beacon will stay as bright as possible. So if I ask myself, do I look, with all the nuclear capability Japan has, even with some of these materials, separated plutonium, and they have capability of enriched uranium, 40 tons of plutonium, with maybe a quarter of them in Japan. Do I lose any sleep worrying about Japan will become a nuclear weapon capable country or nuclear weapons country because we don't have any differentiation between NPT anymore? No, I don't. But do we have any problem on security? No. I think that the security problem is there. But I would argue that for an island country like Japan, it's easier to protect that material, much easier than even in a weapons country like the United States, because the border is so wild. So that is what I say. We have to put things into that perspective to evaluate the situation. But again, in my pseudo-domino situation, I will still argue what would make Japan to change psychology is only internally generated to find out the alliance, the trust, the insurance the insurance policy they have been invested in. The United States does not come forward. If that's at any given time become a doubt, then that's the beginning of the action.
Great. Well, on that note, my apologies, we have a little bit of time constraint. Please join me in thanking the speakers here, and this concludes the Nuclear Dominos in Northeast Asia. Thank you.